want to take a moment first, though, to remind everybody that to take a moment to use the NACM app to find out more about this session as it gets going, and to also rate the session afterwards. It also has some social media things to post tweets about what you're hearing about here today. Our two experts here this morning are Jannet Lewis from the National Center. She's a principal court management consultant there at the center. And Judge Jennifer Bailey, presiding judge of the Civil Division, 11th Judicial Circuit, which is Miami-Dade, Florida. These two are planning a highly interactive session here today. As we go around, I want everybody to, as you have a comment, to take a moment to let us get a microphone to you, because this session's being streamed and people can hear. And as we get started here, I'd like you to join me in welcoming these two in their presentation today.
Good morning. I'll start off. AI is sort of like the latest sexy thing. If you read your Arkansas Democrat Gazette this morning, big headline, U.S. to push artificial intelligence. President signed an executive order to prioritize research and development in AI, the American AI Initiative. What could go wrong? The order also calls on agencies to protect civil liberties, privacy, and American values in applying AI. Got good ideas. AI is a truly artificial construct when we talk about artificial intelligence, because people tend to think of it as this sort of separate monolithic thing. But AI is really dependent on intelligence. I know it's, I can't believe any of you all came, because the topic of this course sounded so incredibly dry, so thank you. But let me just ask you, how many of you, whatever your funding authority is, whether it's local funding or through the legislature, how many people in the last, 5 years have had anybody say to you, whoa, let me throw a whole lot of money your way. What you need is a bunch of new positions. Let me help you and solve all your problems. Anybody? Anybody? No? Blank stares? The reason why I bring that up is because what AI is about for courts is about working smarter. And what this class is about is to try and talk about what we already have in terms of our systems that are generally employed in our court systems, and are there ways to use those systems that we already have to work better, to work smarter. So, Jannet?
Well, we have a couple what-ifs up here. Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me. And we're going to get into each one and discuss them, but we just want to introduce them here early, just so you can kind of let it sink in and be thinking about it. Like, what if software could check your documents for completeness as they come in? Wouldn't that be awesome? What if software could take data off of those documents that attorneys file or self-represented litigants file and extract that and populate like your case management systems and other applications? What if software could be trained to pull data off of those documents that you don't normally pull or that case management systems don't already collect? Like, maybe you get a special request for some information, or maybe you want to look at some statistics on some trends and it's not something that the case management system already has or other applications, but you can go back because that information is right there in the document. So we're going to be getting into each one of these, but before we do, I want to talk a little bit about tools and how they work. And we're not going to get too geeked out about it, but you just need to understand, like, in the background, how does this stuff work? So we're really talking about a stack of tools, but how this works is that the system uses machine learning. It is very statistical based, and it does a lot of analytics. So it's a human-machine partnership So the human with the knowledge that would normally do it manually will train the software, working with the vendor to do it properly, train the software to target certain bits of information and learn what that is. So it's called,
That's where the intelligence part comes.
yeah, you're going to label the data. You're going to label the data, and you're going to identify what is a social security number, what is the case type, what's the hearing room location, just anything you can think of that you want to collect, either to extract or possibly redact. You will train those documents to do it, and train the software to find those in documents. And one of the things the software does on its own that I thought was really cool when we did some proofs of concepts is it automatically will review these documents and look at this big blob, a collection of document images, and it can look at certain trends and classify them into groups on its own. And it does a pretty accurate job of that. But then when you get with the human, you can get really accurate about, is this a civil filing? Is this a debt collection civil filing? You can really have the machine drill down. And what's nice about being able to classify these documents into groups or categories is you can have different rules on what you want to do and what you want to collect based on those classifications. So it just gives you a ton of flexibility. So we did 2 proofs of concepts on the redaction. But the steps for redaction are pretty similar to what you would do for extraction. So we had a set of, I call them plain vanilla targets because each state has different things that it needs to redact based on state statute. But we did the common ones that people could relate to. And they were either structured things like a social security number that follows very specific patterns or unstructured targets like maybe victim name. So we put some tough challenges in there. In the first proof of concept, we had 5 states, and they happened to be states that the 2 vendors were in already. So they had already had some familiarity with those documents. They had already worked in those states and built up a pretty good knowledge base. So not surprising, they were in the high 90%, like 95% or better accurate on finding and redacting those targets. Pretty amazing. So we did a second proof of concept that was just 1 state, Arizona, but a larger volume. But we had a variety of documents in there. Neither vendor that participated in this had done any work in Arizona. So this is our first time seeing the documents. And so we had, of course, limited time to do this, but they still, on like a development level intro, got 61% accuracy. And initially, well, in that second proof of concept, they actually got better scores in the unstructured document because those are harder. So they spent more time working on those. But those structured documents are going to get in the high 90s pretty easily. So I wasn't too worried about seeing that. So they had time constraints, so they kind of chose their battles, if you will. So that report link is there. So if you want to read that, it goes into detail on all the steps that the proof of concept took, and it goes into details like if you were to implement this in your jurisdiction, what you can expect. So there's a lot of upfront work where you're doing the learning. So, and then once it reaches certain thresholds of accuracy, then you can let it loose. On the threshold of accuracy, if the machine will rate itself. Like, I'm only 60% sure I've got everything. I'm seeing certain things here because I understand context better now through AI, but I'm not 100% sure. Like, I think there might be a victim name here. So it might highlight that area, and it's going to put that in a human review queue. But what's nice about that is the software now will help point the human where to look for those things. It'll have hot zones. So it makes it so much more efficient. And as that human reviews it in that review queue and marks it up, that machine is learning. And it's getting better and better. That's part of the continuous learning process. So courts and clerks that have implemented this, the upfront work is pretty intense. But once you get that done and you get to the continuous learning, it's pretty manageable. But there is some upfront work and a certain volume that you have to put in to get the accuracy rates that you're looking for.
So let me just chime in here to put, because I'm not techie. I have the PowerPoint on paper. I don't even download that NACM app. I'm so sorry. But what I'll say is this. Look, as we've moved to digital files, almost everybody's dealing with some form of redaction software to deal with the Social Security numbers and the account numbers and all the financial information, credit card numbers, things like that, that people in no way should ever put into the digital world that idiots, and I include lawyers as a large chunk of that category, do. So what we're talking about here is taking this redaction software, and it's pretty good on things like account numbers and socials, because those are pattern identification things that are pretty uniform across the country. I mean, Wells Fargo account number in Miami is the same as a Wells Fargo account number in Idaho. But taking that to the next level, like what else can we do with the skills that this machine has? And just by way of example, we all know, Tom Clark's told me 1,000 times, court technology slogan, yesterday's technology, tomorrow. But we try. But this was I think this was the Times. Yeah, the New York Times last week. Roughly a third of the content published by Bloomberg News uses some form of automated technology. The system used by the company Cyborg assists reporters in churning out thousands of articles based on the company earnings report. The program takes a financial report the moment it appears and spits out an immediate news story that includes the pertinent facts and figures. And financial news is super quick twitch now, right? So it's all between Bloomberg and Reuters. So this is a huge edge. So this is going on all around us. We have this software that already is starting to do these things. What else can we do with it to do our job better? What else can we do better for data quality and performance measures, because we all know that that's a thing. So
what we're saying is drink the Kool-Aid and believe that this works, because we're going to come up with some ideas. If you just accept that premise, we're going to start brainstorming exactly what Judge Bailey said. What can we use this for? So let's just start with the first what if. What if software could check documents for completeness? A lot of people do e-filing. Maybe you can check things right there at e-filing before they hit submit. So that could help, a lot of quality control issues right there on the front end before it even gets to the clerk in the court.
So let me give you an example of this. And I'm going to give you a rudimentary example that the current software just does. My claim to fame was I became the administrative judge in Miami about 45 days after the Lehman Brothers collapse. And our foreclosure cases went from 7,000 cases in 2007, foreclosure cases, to 90,000 foreclosure cases in 2010. Our typical entire civil caseload in a year is 45,000, so we were dying. And one of the things that we had to figure out a way to do, foreclosure cases, we're a judicial foreclosure state. It's a one hearing deal, generally. But tracking the data, there were things that you needed at that hearing. You needed to make sure everybody was served. You needed to make sure everybody was defaulted or eligible for default. They had to bring in the original note. They had to have the proper affidavits. 70% of our hearings were squandered because people were coming in without the correct set of documents. And we created a software program on our own where they had to submit everything digitally in advance and check every box. So they at least had to pretend. They could have, frankly, uploaded a grocery list, but they still had to check the box that it was an affidavit. So by doing that, we managed to avoid losing all that hearing time, right? Okay, so that's a really basic, practical application of what this thing can do. This software can do without having to, put together a system with duct tape, which is what we did. So, for example, a lot of cases drag on because something's missing. If you have a contract case, the typical breach of contract rules in most states say you got to attach a copy of a contract. If I'm looking at a complaint and it's only 2 pages long, basically I know they haven't attached the contract. This analyzes on a much more sophisticated level. The AI will look for a constellation of items that are key points to make sure something is what it purports to be. So, for example, if you have forms for a mortgage foreclosure complaint or a debt collection case or something like that, it can use those forms to get very smart, very fast about what ought to be in there. And if it's not in there, so an account stated credit card collection case, right? They're attaching the last bill or whatever it is. The name on that doesn't match the name on the complaint. Why doesn't it match? Because they sold all this stuff for, 0.001 cent. And said, you go out and collect it. So it's, Select Portfolio by the Lakes, Inc., or LLC. But that's not, but it says Amex on the card statement, what gives? That's something that AI would flag and address up front, as opposed to letting that proceed, get set for hearing in front of a judge. The judge looks at it and says, this doesn't match. Why doesn't this match? Where's the affidavits? So what you're trying to do is preserve the most expensive resource in the court system, which is judicial time. Every time a judge touches a case, the case should close or progress. So AI can help us make a huge difference by checking that. In addition, on a public trust and confidence thing, who wants to drive all the way downtown, park downtown, if your courthouse is downtown? I mean, parking in Miami is $25 an hour. Somebody's hauled their sorry butts all the way down to this courthouse for me to stand back look back at them and say, I'm sorry, your documents aren't complete. That's not going to build public trust and confidence. So if we can give people feedback up front, red line, how much of us, we can't check out at Amazon because we didn't put everything in, or you can't buy the ticket, or you can't do whatever but we don't have anything like that, but we could, because we can.
We have a lot of different perspectives from, statisticians, data analysts, to court administration, different types of managers. Now you've heard some really fantastic examples. Judge Bailey just can come up with them like so quickly. She's probably a vendor's dream test subject.
Nightmare, dream, they're so close.
Now that you've heard this, what ideas do you think that you have, that you haven't even heard, that you think would be a good use of this particular tool?
Yeah, tell us all your problems. This is the venting with solutions thing from the guy this morning.
Well, good morning, Judge. Thank you so much. I just heard you talk about judicial foreclosures. In Massachusetts, we don't have judicial foreclosures. It's quasi-judicial. The interesting piece for my court, the housing court, we see those cases during what we call summary process eviction.
Right.
So we don't distinguish between a straight-up landlord-tenant eviction and a summary process post-foreclosure eviction. But as you know, those are very complex cases for judges to review paperwork that they've never seen prior to the foreclosure. They are seeing it after the foreclosure. But what you've just given this conversation planted a seed that perhaps there's something we can do on the back end in summary process to make sure those affidavits and everything that's required for a foreclosure to be complete in our state under the power of sale. Perhaps that's something we should be exploring. It takes a tremendous amount of time for our judges. I can tell you those are the cases that go beyond time standards. And we usually have a tremendous amount of frustration because parties want to resolve those cases quickly, but they take a tremendous amount of time.
So there's two ways. One is the human way. I mean, in Miami, we were doing it the human way because we didn't have any choice. That came on us like a tsunami. But with AI, if we can figure out the benchmarks, the things that ought to be there, then the software can screen for it. It's not going to rule one way or another. I mean, that's sometimes you get judges in the room and they're like, freak out. No, but it's going to flag it for you, right? It's going to flag an issue for you if you've identified that. Now, the critical thing for a lot of this is to make sure that you've got good definitions. Everything on data quality comes down to the definitions. And sometimes judges are so busy judging that they're not in the room as these systems are being developed. You got to get the judges in the room. You got to get the users in the room, because the judges know, what are the problems that make you nuts, right? Like what is like, oh, God, what a waste of time. Where are the problems that people routinely are experiencing? The same 20% of problems occur 80% of the time, right? Then you have the 20% of the problems that are the kind of outliers. So if we can identify those and flag those, that's part of the role of artificial, this is the intelligence part. We have to loan the computers, the programs, our intelligence to tell it, this is what you have to look for. So I encourage you to the fullest extent possible, get your users, get your judges in the room. And you can have user groups. You can bring in legal aid. You can bring in attorney groups, defense lawyers, plaintiffs lawyers, collection lawyers, whatever you want, to talk about the kinds of specific problems that they have that slow their cases down and flag that.
I just want to add on this particular piece, as far as how it applies to redaction, I know a lot of states are now putting the responsibility of redaction on the filer, which probably doesn't work really well, but wouldn't it be cool if when that self-represented litigant files at the portal, it checks and says, there's a 80% chance you have confidential information in here. Are you sure you want to submit? And then, if the court doesn't be responsible for the redaction, maybe they can partner with a vendor and say, for this fee, this vendor can redact this for you. And then you can review the redaction and then hit submit. And so you're still catching a lot of those problems upstream because you don't want to do harm later, even though it's not on the court. People are still going to file stuff. And then if you put that online for public access, it's still going to get out there and there might be harms. So whatever you can do earlier in the game to resolve that, the better.
And let's face it, if Miami, Florida, capital of fraud, so many things to be proud of. But the upshot of it is, even if the burden's on the redactor, if somebody comes in and says, yeah, I was able to do all this because I got it all out of the court file, again, going back to public trust and confidence, we have an obligation sometimes to be smart for the people who are stressed out by the problems that they're bringing to us. So we need to make sure that we're encouraging them to do what they need to do to protect themselves and their data.
Now, we're going to move on to the next what if. What if the software could populate by extracting data into your existing systems? And I know a lot of people have spent millions of dollars on case management systems, but a lot of those fields aren't being used because you just don't have the time and resources to fill those in. So you're not really being able to get the total benefit of that case management system you've invested in. But wouldn't it be great if the software can pull that information right off those court documents and populate that? So now you're maximizing the benefit and getting a better return on your investment. And we've been talking for probably decades about trying to eliminate duplicate data entry. It's still a huge issue. There's still a lot of people key punching stuff in over and over and adding additional errors along the way. So that's one of the benefits of this tool, is that it can extract it and then populate several databases, not just one.
Can I just ask, how many people in here are on a Tyler product, use Odyssey? Okay, there's 3. Okay, this is my gift to you. This is going to say, this is why I came to Arkansas. I was really involved with the Civil Justice Initiative with CCJ, and one of the things we're trying to do is create a means for case managing throughout the civil docket. And in Miami, we have Tyler's Odyssey, and we have like dollar store Odyssey. We have the cheapest Odyssey you can buy. Like anything it doesn't do it in Miami, except that I kept saying, this thing must do more than just like take pictures of filings. Look at all these tabs, look at all this stuff. It's got to do more than this. There's a thing under Odyssey that's configurable by you. You don't need to pay anybody to do it, called time standards. And as far as I can tell, because I've talked to Tom Clark and everybody I can find, nobody in the country is using this feature in Odyssey. So you can say to this part of the Odyssey program, this is an auto negligence case, and I want a case management order for an auto negligence case and it's going to be a streamlined type of case. And if you've defined the case management sequence, T plus 30, T plus 90, T plus 120, this is when I want the pleadings closed, this is when I want discovery closed, as a kind of template case management order, it will create that entire schedule for you, and you can create an order with it. And nobody's doing it because nobody knows about it. You can take case management systems, you can use it to tickle, you can use it to tickle the rules. So by way of example, and this is the example I always used, and I used it in the last session when I was an attendee, is if there's a deadline for a discovery response, you can create a time standard to say, look, I see a request to produce, I don't see a response. Instead of putting the burden on the party to seek the response, who's due the response, where you're incentivizing the bad behavior of not responding, you can look for these types of events and within the system identify what's not happening. You can equally look at the data that's in these documents and say, what do I do next? What should happen next?
So it isn't just extracting the data and putting in an application, it's empowering you to do things with the data that maybe you couldn't do before. Maybe even develop some ad hoc applications. So if you, I'm interested in, besides case management system, are there any other applications out there that you could see that this would benefit from if you could just extract information off of documents and populate an application that's very important to your court or clerk operations?
I'll throw something out. It's a really good way to find implicit bias. If you're looking at your arrest records and you're looking at your sentencing records, because you're going to get race and ethnicity off the arrest records, and you're going to get sentencing patterns off the sentencing records matched with the charges, adjusted for similarity, you can find implicit bias. Now, it was interesting, in the last session, there was a discussion about, well, this is data and, it's going to make judges look bad. Not knowing it makes us look worse. Not knowing it is failing to confront realities that data can reveal to us that we don't really want to deal with. And the truth of the matter is, whatever biases might exist, if you're a judge that tends to give custody to the mother, if you're a sentencing judge, and it's happening, let's face it, Sarasota Herald Tribune in Florida has downloaded everybody's sentencing records and done an analysis on racial disparities in sentencing across Florida. The good news is Miami was the only place that came out, even Stevens, so we were very happy with that. But there are a lot of jurisdictions that were really distressed, but we need to be able to confront those kinds of issues. We need to be able to use what's in the data to say, look, if there's a charging bias, we need to look at the folks that are doing the charging. If there's an arrest bias, we need to look at the arrest bias. If there's no bias, we need to just say, pat ourselves on the back and say, keep it up. But we need to understand exactly what it is that we're doing. And we need to not hide from the additional insights and the additional information that data can provide. And look, let's face it, most of us operate to some degree in the sunshine. Florida is a huge sunshine state. And so the data is going to get pulled. I mean, I would rather take the responsibility of making sure the data is right and use what additional data I can get to double check the premises of what's being reported than just stick my head in the sand. Because if I don't crunch those numbers, if I don't get this data, the newspaper's going to, or some researcher's going to. So it's really important to make sure that we take full advantage of the documents in front of us.
Well, for data extraction also, there's a quality control component, because like if somebody files something from the e-filing portal in civil, and there's like this drop-down list of what kind of filing it is, a lot of times we all know what happens. They just pick the first convenient thing. It may not actually be what they're filing. And so when you extract the data, you get more accurate information about what kind of filing it is. Like civil has a ton of choices.
So you're not adding this human component of somebody looking at it, and we were just talking about this in the last session, doing other, because the system is going to pull out the correct information. And so your data quality and your accuracy theoretically would go up.
So no ideas on other databases, just case management.
Any,
Right.
Are you just stunned with the possibilities? Is that you guys are just soaking
It's a lot
it all
to take in.
It's
Just,
just,
I mean, it's how you define case, because ultimately, a lot of our data sets, even if they're all separate, are still used for case management. But I'm thinking about particularly in our child welfare cases, because
Sure.
there are a lot of timelines that are incredibly important, and also disparity issues that you want to keep an eye on. And it seems to me that that's an area where that has potentially for a lot of promise.
so here's the big challenge for courts, right? I mean, we all know this. There's a bazillion reports that nobody reads. There's a bazillion things in the file that just get put in the file and nobody may read. Because if it doesn't come across the judge's desk, right, it's a tree falling in the forest. Like, how do you escalate it? Well, what if AI could escalate, could watch for specific kinds of reports or a constellation of reports? Hey, there's been 4 reports at this address, and red flag it. The data's coming in from different places. It could be a police report over here. It could be some kind of school truancy report over here. It could be some kind of child welfare visit over here. Those things all go different places, but what if that could all get cohered into a, the software says, you ought to take a look at this. Or give us the ability to assess how a child is doing based on multiple reports from multiple sources.
and I also know that in Palm Beach County, as far as the accuracy of the data going into your case management system, like we have mandatory e-filing in Florida, so when things come in, their clerks were spending a lot of times correcting that title of what kind of filing it was. And in Palm Beach is using the lights out robot that's doing this type of data extraction and auto population. And they've reduced a ton of staff time just on that alone. So it may sound like that's just a little thing, but when you look at how much time human resources take to just do that piece, you're getting a lot of staff time back that could be doing other more important things. So we probably need to move on to the next what if. Now this one is really interesting. What if it could pull data that you haven't even thought of? You know, other discrete data that you might want to analyze some special trend, or you might want to use this for research. I know at the National Center, they pay interns to look at court documents to pull out, it's a very tedious and time-consuming process, to pull out the bits of information that they're wanting to research, because it's probably not something that's ordinarily captured in a case management system, or maybe you have to correlate with other data. So what if you could use these tools even for research? That would be huge just by itself. So we really want to do some brainstorming, like what if you could just not limit yourself to applications you already have, but just step outside the box for a bit?
Like, what do you want to know that you don't know? Like, I want to know how many cancellations there are. It would help me a lot when I'm going to the legislature and they say, why aren't these cases moving? I'm going, because there's a bazillion cancellations all the time, but I can't count them because they're buried in the court file. And why are the cancellations? That could get pulled out. Why, why? I'm seeing some nods. Talk to me. Anything?
Any ideas? This is a fun one.
Okay, Diane's got her hand up because she's shilling for us.
One thing that we've been working on is looking at the difference in kids who are coming into the court from school-related arrest versus community arrest. And where we can get them to check that it's a school-related arrest, then we can get pretty good data about that. The problem is, of course, a lot of them don't do it, but it seems like that would be a pretty easy thing to search documents for.
Well, you
Is
just
any
search on
reference
the
to
arrest,
school?
the address. If you put in the addresses of all the schools and compare them with the A forms, then you're going to know whether the location of the arrest was at a
And
school.
you could do some geolocation and see trends and see, I just see there's tons of stuff you could do to help keep more of the kids from coming into the court or doing more cooperative work.
Or
between the
figuring out
systems.
what's up at 10 Mile Elementary, Anybody else got any specific ideas, or what kind of problems do you wish you knew more about? So I'll give you an example. My bailiwick is civil, as is obvious. So I would love to know how many motions actually get heard and at what point in time, throughout the life of a case typically, because there's a lot of motions filed and never heard. And what are in calendar, T plus whatever, when is it most likely that a motion is going to be heard? So my anecdata, my experienced judge head says there'll typically be one hearing on the pleadings and one hearing on discovery in kind of a case where everybody gets along. Maybe one other motion. So I'm guessing that it's 3 judges, but I don't know that. But wouldn't it be cool if I could have the software go into the court file and tell me exactly when are hearings occurring, when are they set, what are they on, so that I could understand for the purposes of managing, and I could break it down by case type, what kind of cases need what kind of attention to project and schedule out those events. Because right now, when you think about it, at least in civil, here's what happens. A case gets filed. There's a problem. After the problem, then you ask for the hearing. Then you get in line with all the other people that had a problem at that particular time. And we get to your problem when we get to it in line with everybody else. Yes?
I'm just thinking about talking about using this in a non-structured environment. You talked about fields of data which are free-form text. And one of the things that I know that we've been talking about is the ability to create shortcuts. Look for the most common things, for example. For example, in fields of data that allow for free-form text, instead of having somebody do research, having a way for a platform to let you know what are the most common things that are entered in that free-form field, so that you can create drop-down menus to save time, particularly for self-represented litigants, possibly in an e-filing scenario. Again, Judge, I know you talked about the relevancy of the courts in the last session I think we were both in. We have to remain relevant. We have to have the ability for self-represented litigants to navigate the system. And sometimes if we see something occurring over and over again, the same information is entered, the ability for us to create, for example, drop-down menus. We're with the clerk of the court. One of the things that we're talking about is the fact that our clerks have to listen to the judges to discern what has occurred in court when they develop minute entries. So again, the ability to evaluate without the use of researchers the free-form text and look for opportunities for shortcuts, I think would be a major efficiency for offices like ours.
Yeah, so the software can take what's in those free-form text, and just like, they do this a lot with graphics now. You guys have probably seen these infographics where the words that occur more frequently are in like 72-point type, and the words that never occur in 3-point type, and they'll splash it across the whole big page. That's analytics 101. But it can do this. And a lot of this is embedded potentially in stuff we already have. That's the cool thing about this, is if you've got redaction data, can we talk to the vendors and say, look, what else can we do with this? If it can identify Social Security numbers, why can't it identify the number of times that somebody says leak in a landlord-tenant response? So that I know whether there's some kind of condition issue that the tenant is arguing about in a landlord-tenant case.
Anyone else? All right, the next what if, and this was a special request by Judge Bailey. What if software could take extracted elements and track basic procedural proposed orders or other documents? How can we make this data start doing some of our other work for us and not just put it in another application? Like what other things can we do with it now that we've extracted it?
So, again, the way we work has so much opportunity to be better. It's great, right? It's the problem with the system is it's the greatest. It's the worst system in the world except for all the rest. So, but a lot of times when we're talking about civil rules, right? The civil rules, our civil rules say, okay, you file your case, you get your summons issued. In Florida, you have 120 days to serve. So, the bottom line is our time standards are 18 months for bench, 12 months for bench, and 18 months for jury, 24 for complex. If they take 4 months to serve, I'm already getting killed on those numbers. So enforcing the rules becomes a burden, and relying on parties, the friction between the parties for rule enforcement, it's not going so well in terms of my being able to respond to these time standards. So what if, a lot of times people drop a complaint and then they want to negotiate for half a year? Okay, so you drop a complaint, and then I'm going to have the system at, say, 30 days go, did you get a summons issued for everybody? No? Order to proceed with summons. Get that out the door, okay? And at 90 days, I'm going to say, is there service on everybody? By party? No? Or there's service on Joe, but not Susie. I'm going to say, you didn't serve Susie. You don't serve Susie in the next 30 days. Susie's dismissed. Susie doesn't get served in the next 30 days, order of dismissal, Susie's out. What we've done is not just tidied up that case from being delayed because somebody goes, oh, 120 days. Oh, I need a motion for extension of time for another 120 days so I can roll over in bed and see if they're there. No. What we're gonna do is we're making people pay attention to the rules. And there is a very powerful aspect to measure what matters, right? Everybody's heard that. By paying attention to the rules, you get compliance with the rules in ways that you don't when people don't think anybody's paying attention. And the truth of the matter is, we don't pay attention to the rules right now unless somebody walks through our door and says, Joe didn't follow the rules. Will you punish him? Will you get no, it's not even will you punish him. Will you give him an order to say, order to follow the rules? Joe didn't follow didn't respond to my discovery. Will you give him an order to follow my discovery? It creates not just disincentives for good behavior. It incentivizes bad behavior, and it makes us inefficient. And at the end of the day, we all know how the system works, but the end users, the businesses, the individuals whose problems are sitting in our courts, they don't know. They're thinking, this is nuts. If the other guy didn't answer the discovery, why do I have to pay my lawyer to drive to downtown Miami, which is usually an hour in traffic, and sit there for an hour because the judge has a motion calendar where they call 100 people all at the same time? That's a great idea. And then drive back. I'm spending $300, $400 just on an order to compel a guy that didn't follow the rules. But software can capture that. Software can capture those kind of events. And court systems can make their own judgment calls about what they think are the proper response options for those kinds of situations, as opposed to it occurring in an ad hoc way, which is how we do it now, case by case, one by one. We can systematize a response to get better compliance and behavior and get better justice across the system.
Right, so you're building smart logic in there, and it's a tool that can really be helpful in managing cases and keeping things moving along. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about that redaction paper, because one of the main impetus of doing that was to improve public access. And one of the holdups is redaction and that capability. But in that paper, it really goes over a lot of the other tools, because if you only buy the redaction, you're not going to get a return on your investment. You're going to pay a lot of money just to do redaction. These vendors really want you to focus on not just redaction, but extracting the data, automating workflows, and doing some predictive analytics to say, is this simple, standard, or complex, so you can put things on tracks and triage things. These vendors have all these tools in the toolkit. We just focused on redaction because it was just easy to get your brain wrapped around that, and we're trying to ease everyone into this technology, even though it's been around for a long time, because the courts are so risk averse. That
Yesterday's technology tomorrow.
They tend to be a little anxious, but we introduced all these other tools in that paper, and the public policy paper, which you also have the link, also goes into that, and some really good definitions on how that works, that if you really want to gain efficiencies and a good return on your investment, that you really need to look at all the tools and their capabilities. And that's why we're doing this session today.
So let me just chime in and follow up on, probably most of you have been exposed to the outcomes of the Conference of Chief Justices Civil Justice Initiative that talks about improvements in civil justice, which is my thing because I was on that committee. But one of the things it advocates is triaging cases into 3 different pathways, right? Differentiate case management. I'm just like, it's been around since 1970, 60. I mean, there's just papers and papers that go back for years and years and years. And people go, well, I don't have anybody to do that. And I'm like, you don't need anybody. The software can do it. The software can come up with the metrics by case type, by amounts of controversy. You can define it and sort those cases for you. Then the people, the intelligent people behind the scenes can double check it, can make sure it makes sense, can whatever. But you don't have somebody sitting there trying to like sort cases because that's not a good use of your resources today. Like I said, we started at the start. Anybody had somebody throwing positions at you? Oh, you want to do triage. Let me give you 4 case managers so you can do triage. It's not going to happen. So the idea is if we can identify indicators of complexity, which we've given to you in the Civil Justice Report that can be found at www.ncsc.org/civil, we've given you the indicators of complexity. I'll give you a great thing. Like, I so want software to do this for me. If somebody files in a simple case more than 5 motions, I know they hate each other. That case now has conflict complexity, right? I got to bring those guys in, and I use guys in the Brooklyn sense, which means girls or guys. I got to bring those lawyers in and say, what are you doing? This is a $50,000 contract dispute, and you guys are at each other's throats. What are you doing? What do we need to do to get this right? Cut it out. Okay? Judges in many situations can be faced with the motions are just piling up. They're piling up faster than you can give them a hearing because these lawyers aren't getting along and they now hate each other and they're saying, I'm filing a motion to compel him to be a better person. And I'm saying, okay. And it happens in family cases a lot. If you can take the markers of complexity in family, there's, as you all probably know, there's a family justice initiative that's following along in the footsteps of the CJI initiative that's doing the same thing, that's looking at what causes family cases to go off the rails. How can we better manage family cases? And you can come up with the same indicators of complexity, like, okay, here's where it's going south. You can sit down with almost any judge, anywhere, get 2 of them in a bar, and start talking to them about when cases go off the rail, and it's universal. At lunch, we don't go to bars. At lunch, and it's universal. They're all the same markers. So if we could get software to flag those markers in the first moment, and you can nip stuff in the bud before people spend time prolonging a case, spend money on lawyers, and spend the emotional capital. I mean, let's face it, nobody comes to court for a good thing. It's all bad things. In civil and in criminal, largely the bad thing already happened. In family and juvenile, you're in the middle of the bad thing. We want to compartmentalize the bad thing, deal with it, and not make it worse. That's the public trust and confidence challenge that this can help us deal with. In addition, people want to know what's going on in court. I mean, look, you pick up the newspaper, you go, oh my God, how many, first of all, like almost every TV judge is from Miami, right? Marilyn Millian, People's Court, Miami. Judge Alex was on, from Miami. Judge David Young, for a while he was the gay TV judge, Miami. Christina Ferrero-Schumacher, I think is on Telemundo or Univision, Miami. Karen Mills Francis, Miami. So, but, people are fascinated with court. So that brings us to our second point, which is there's a lot of information floating around out there about what we do that's misinformation because people can't look at our files without a lot of pain.
Right. Well, one of the cool tools, and we're kind of coming down on our time, that's in the toolkit that I just want to spend a quick moment on, is the predictive analytics. And there's actually subsets. So you have your subject matter experts that kind of know some of the indicators that you can train, but then you can have the software. It's like, okay, we have this case and we know the outcomes. Let me look at a large volume of data and come up with a model that predicts this without the subject matter experts, and then you can compare the models. And it might be things that you never thought of
You
that are
don't know.
predictors.
Right. We don't know what we don't know.
There might be
There's
certain words that you
There's
wouldn't pick
markers
up on.
that we don't know.
Yep. Font size, you never know. I mean, but the machine can look at a much larger volume of data than humans could, or that you would want to spend human resources to look through. And they can pick up and flag things that might not be on your radar. And the funnest subset, I don't know if that's the proper word, funnest, but sentiment analysis, they actually have linguists that will label words as positive, negative, or neutral. And they build up this knowledge base. And so I think an earlier speaker was talking about they had to pick up if somebody was being sarcastic or not. But it's actually a big thing. And I went to a data science conference, and the most interesting introduction to sentiment analysis, the guy did a hackathon himself using Twitter during a controversial event like the presidential election. So he looked at emojicons and he correlated it with hashtags, and then he made his little quad things, and there were prayer hands and then an icon that involved the middle finger, and it was just really interesting how he picked up and correlated sentiment analysis, and it's a whole body of work. And you're going to find a lot of sentiment probably in court documents, and it might indicate how that's going to go or where you might need to intervene. And so a lot of the vendors now, even in case management, have predictive analytics tools in their software, and you probably should have some discussions on how to use that better so that you can more efficiently manage cases.
And
Can that be used for safety also? Because I'm thinking about flagging those cases where
can that be used for safety, to flag for red flags for safety? Yeah, you would think it could. I mean, not to actually trigger action, but to trigger review. I mean, that's what we want to emphasize with all this is judging is fundamentally, justice is a humanistic process, but we need to be able to work smarter when doing that. But it sure could tell you when things were starting to fall apart or fray.
I just watched a co-parenting application use sentiment analysis when the co-parents are communicating with each other, and it will evaluate the tone of the communication. And if it meets a certain threshold, like you can't send this is just too ugly, and it offers alternative communications to send that in a more appealing way to reduce conflict. And I just thought that was a really cool use of sentiment analysis. So it's using natural language processing, predictive analytics, and all of that. Like,
do you
this is not
really
gonna go
want to
over.
say this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Don't we wish we had that? You know?
And that probably would avoid a lot of problems and a lot of things coming to court just by helping people communicate in more positive and effective ways. So we're at the conclusion. If there are any other opportunities that we might be overlooking, you see certain challenges to these tools or have other questions, now's the time to bring them up.
Yeah, so basically, I was wondering, are you speaking more in terms of a more uniform document that the machine could actually, or the software could actually read better? Or are you just talking about in general any document that can be come across? Because I know you were saying we could program the software to look for certain phrases.
So here's the beauty of it. The beauty of it is it can read. If it can read it, it can understand it.
It's
It
unstructured
doesn't.
forms
It's
too.
unstructured. So because who wants to fight the fight of getting everybody to fill out the form right? That's like So this is not traditional analysis. The stuff we've been able to do, the keyword kind of stuff, or looking at this field on this form. This is the next level. This says, I don't care if you didn't do it right. If you didn't put your kids in the paragraph 3 of the form divorce complaint, but somewhere in paragraph 11 it says you have 2 kids, I'm going to still be a computer and tell you that there's kids in this case, even though they didn't put it in the proper place in the form under paragraph 3. So that's the really cool thing about this. And it sees patterns and constellations that we don't know or understand. That might help us, going back to the point of better drop-downs, create better forms to begin with. Yeah.
One small thing I'm thinking about is that with vexatious litigants and some of the 300-page crazy documents you get, yeah, this would be great. It'd also be great on the back end of when you're trying to figure out what a JOD actually says. What just happened? What are the because the clients will
Case closing.
incorporate property settlement
cases.
agreements that I have no idea how they have that much time to write that many words, and then you're stuck there trying to analyze it. Those two things I think would be fantastic for use of this.
So I just came out of the data quality session because I'm chairing a data quality work group in Miami, in Florida. And, clerks are great at opening cases because they get checks. Thank you for getting the checks because those are important. But they're not as good at closing cases because there's, we do it all different ways and it's all different things. God, even if we could just use this to figure out the constellation of stuff that should say, yo, close this case, that would make a huge difference on your time to disposition, age of pending caseload, and clearance rate, which are the metrics that everybody's going to be judged by. And the truth of the matter is, well, I don't love them as complete data sets because they're very similar. It's like asking, what year was your child born? How old are they? And what grade are they in school? It's 3 different data sets, but it gives you very similar information. But still, if that's what legislators and voters are going to judge my judges by, I want to make sure that's right. So there's not just benefits from the standpoint of better justice, there's also benefits from making sure we're understanding our own performance better.
Hey, real quick, you talked about, I just kind of want to know where this technology is. We've seen there's a vendor here that's showing how they can extract information. So presumably somebody's filling something out, it could say, we see this, is this what you want? And it still gives you a piece of human control. We've been talking about laying over this technology for redaction. We're in one of the largest counties in the United States. There is no way that as people are viewing on our center, the ability for us to look to see if this technology is catching things that we need it to catch. Is anybody using this technology right now for redaction, for example, for taking large amounts of documentation and putting them online with nothing other than a quality control piece that goes back and samples and checks? Is it being, I want to know how mainstream is this and how far along is this in that continuum of being used, rollout?
Florida's a big user because the redaction responsibility is on the clerks. And so pretty much every county in Florida, including Miami-Dade, which is 60% of the case filing, Palm Beach County is a huge user. They use it. And they have a big push on putting things on for public access for redaction. I know Texas and Ohio, several counties there also have this in production in their clerk's offices.
So Judge, can we come visit?
Yeah, like now, we're in Little Rock in February in the rain. I'm like thinking, I got here yesterday and thought, it's a beautiful place. I love it. I love the Clinton Library, but there was a moment yesterday like, what am I thinking? But yeah, come on down. The redaction is, I think, fairly successful. Florida is crazy because technology for the courts is controlled at a county level. So if you're a circuit with 3 counties, you have 3 different systems sometimes. So there's a very diverse set of products floating around in Florida. But yeah, I think, certainly there's some people on JTC from Florida too, right?
Right.
And so they would be able to tell you better than me because, that's part of the gig of being a judge, right? You only see the end. They only come to you if it's a problem.
So Florida has a unique way of handling that. You can have diverse products, but it has to meet certain technical and functional standards. And we do have an access governance board in Florida that has a matrix on who can see what by role. There's rules on what exactly the clerk has to redact. So it's all really clear. And so everyone, regardless of their system, plays by the same set of rules, business rules.
But yeah, Miami, February.
Folks, this session to the end today. I want to remind everybody to rate the session on the app, and I'd like you to join me in thanking Judge Bailey and Jannet for their presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.